My daughter hid my $500,000 insurance payout from me, but one phone call exposed everything. It was supposed to be a lifeline, a promise of a fresh start after Dad's passing. $500,000. Gone. Not gone exactly, but misplaced. And the only person who knew exactly where it was, or rather wasn't, was Sarah. My Sarah. My eldest. The one I'd always leaned on, the one I thought would always have my back. Now, looking back, it's so painfully clear. The subtle shifts, the hushed tones when I'd ask about the insurance paperwork, the way she'd steer conversations away from anything remotely financial. I was grieving, you see. Raw. My world had imploded with Dad's sudden death from a heart attack that had blindsided us all. He was only 62, still had so much life to live, so many unfinished projects. He'd been the rock of our family, the steady hand, the quiet provider. And then, nothing. The silence in the house was deafening, a gaping void where his booming laugh used to be. I found myself drowning in the mundane tasks of death, the lawyers, the funeral arrangements, the endless paperwork. That's where Sarah stepped in, all competent and organized. She was always the responsible one, the planner. While I, the mom, the homemaker, the one who'd always managed the family's social calendar and smoothed over rough edges, was lost in a fog of sorrow. I remember the day the insurance agent called. It was a Tuesday, raining outside, mirroring the mood inside. I was sitting at Dad's old oak desk, trying to sort through his tax documents, a task that felt both impossible and deeply personal. Sarah was there, supposedly helping. She was perched on the edge of the desk, scrolling through her phone, a faint sigh escaping her lips every now and then. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" I said, my voice a little shaky. A pleasant professional voice introduced himself as Mr. Davies from Sterling Life Insurance. He was calling, he said, to confirm details regarding the policy held by my late husband, Robert Sterling. My heart gave a lurch. Dad's policy. I'd completely forgotten about it in the chaos. "Yes," I managed to say, my throat tight. "I'm his wife, Eleanor. How can I help?" He explained that the policy had matured and a significant payout was due. He mentioned a figure, a sum so large it felt unreal. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice calm and measured, "the death benefit on your husband's policy amounts to $500,000. We've already processed the claim. The check is being prepared for release." $500,000. My mind reeled. This was everything. This was the security Dad had always wanted for us. This was a buffer, a way to make sure I wouldn't struggle. This was the chance to finally fix up the old house, to maybe take that trip to Italy I'd always dreamed of. I felt a surge of something akin to relief, a small flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. I turned to Sarah, a watery smile on my face. "Sarah, honey, that was the insurance company. Dad had a policy, a big one, $500,000. I expected a gasp, a hug, a shared moment of stunned relief. Instead, Sarah just blinked. Her eyes, usually so expressive, were strangely blank. She looked at her phone, then back at me, a faint, almost imperceptible frown on her brow. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "Really?" It was the "oh" that struck me first. Not surprise, not excitement, not even a hint of emotion. Just, "Oh, yes, really," I repeated, my smile faltering. $500,000. Can you believe it? She finally put her phone down, though her fingers still idly traced the edge of the screen. "That's good, Mom," she said, but her gaze seemed to drift past me, out the window. Something felt off, terribly off. I brushed to the side. Grief, I told myself. She's grieving too. She's processing it differently. Maybe she's overwhelmed. Over the next few weeks, the insurance money became a quiet hum beneath the surface of our lives. Mr. Davies had assured me the check would be mailed within 10 business days. I kept looking for it, eagerly anticipating its arrival. Sarah, meanwhile, was in her element. She'd taken over much of the household management, organizing mail, paying bills, running errands. She was efficient, almost to a fault. When I asked about the insurance check, she'd say things like, "Oh, I'm handling it, Mom, just waiting for the official paperwork to clear," or, "It'll come when it comes, don't worry about it." Her reassurances, however, felt increasingly hollow. There was a guardedness about her, a subtle deflection that I couldn't quite pinpoint, but it prickled at the back of my mind. We had a younger daughter, Emily, who was still in college, living on a tight budget. Emily was the sensitive one, the one who wore her heart on her sleeve. She called me almost every day, her voice tinged with worry. "Mom, are you okay? Have you heard anything about Dad's policy? I want to help, but I'm so broke." I'd always reassure her, "Don't worry about us, honey. Your father was very good about planning. We'll be fine." But now, a seed of doubt had been sown. Was Dad's planning truly enough? And where was this substantial sum of money that was supposed to be our safety net? The cracks started to widen during Thanksgiving dinner. It was our first holiday without Dad, and the house felt cavernous. The usual warmth and laughter were muted, replaced by an undercurrent of sadness. Sarah had insisted on hosting, taking charge of the entire meal, the decorations, everything. She'd even invited my sister, Aunt Carol, and her husband, Uncle Mike, who were always a bit of a strain. Carol had a way of making passive-aggressive comments that felt like tiny paper cuts, and Mike mostly just grunted and ate. Sarah, however, seemed determined to force a semblance of normalcy. She moved around the dining room, a plastic smile plastered on her face, refilling wine glasses, making small talk. But I noticed it again, the way she'd subtly shut down any mention of Dad's estate. When Uncle Mike, bless his oblivious heart, asked, "So, Eleanor, how's everything with Bob's insurance settling? Heard it was a good policy." Sarah practically jumped. "Oh, that's all handled, Mike," she interjected, her voice a little too bright. "Just administrative stuff, nothing to worry about it." She then quickly changed the subject to the weather, a topic so bland it was almost offensive. Later, as I was clearing plates, I cornered Sarah in the kitchen. "Sarah," I began, my voice low, "I still haven't seen that insurance check. Mr. Davies said it would be here by now. Did you pick it up from the mail?" She turned from rinsing a plate, her back to me, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "No, Mom, I told you, I'm handling it. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" I pressed. "Is there a problem?" She finally turned around, her eyes flashing with something that looked like annoyance, quickly masked by forced calm. "No problem, Mom. Just things take time. Bureaucracy. You wouldn't understand." The "you wouldn't understand" stung. I was a grown woman, a widow, and I certainly understood bureaucracy. I understood grief. I understood that $500,000 was a life-altering sum of money that I had a right to know about. The dismissal, the implication that I was too naive or too emotional to grasp the complicated nature of things, felt like a deliberate push away. It was the first time I felt a genuine anger begin to simmer beneath my sorrow. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the living room, the silence amplifying the unease in my chest. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Sarah's reactions, her evasiveness. It wasn't just grief. It was something else, something deliberate. I remembered Dad's meticulous record-keeping. He'd kept everything in a fireproof box in his study. I went to the study, the air still thick with his scent, pipe tobacco and old books. I opened the box, my hands trembling slightly. There were his old service medals, my wedding ring, some family photos. And then, tucked away at the bottom, was a thick manila envelope labeled Sterling Life Insurance, Policy Details. Inside were copies of the policy documents, the claim form, and a letter from Mr. Davies confirming the payout. But there was also something else. A letter from Sterling Life, dated 2 weeks after Dad's death, addressed to Sarah. It stated that the payout had been released and directed to a designated bank account. A designated bank account. Not mine. And the account number was provided. It wasn't a bank I recognized. My blood ran cold. Sarah hadn't just been handling it. She had actively, deliberately taken the money. The $500,000 that was meant to secure my future, my comfort, my peace of mind. She had intercepted it. She had taken it and hidden it. The implication was staggering. Why? What was she doing with it? Why hadn't she told me? The sheer audacity of it, the betrayal, was a physical blow. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I sat there for a long time, the papers spread out on the desk, the silence of the house pressing in. The grief for my husband was suddenly overshadowed by a raw, burning anger. It was a different kind of pain, sharper, more immediate. It was the pain of being lied to, of being manipulated by my own daughter. I thought of Emily struggling with her tuition, and the realization hit me with sickening force.
Sarah hadn't just taken my money, she'd potentially jeopardized Emily's education as well. The next few days were a blur of conflicting emotions. I replayed every interaction, every evasive answer, every subtle redirection. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. Sarah, my seemingly responsible, loving daughter, had orchestrated this. She had seen me at my most vulnerable, lost in grief, and she had taken advantage of it. The trust I had placed in her, the reliance I had developed, now felt like a foolish vulnerability. I didn't confront her, not yet. A part of me was still in shock, numb to the full reality of it. Another part, however, was starting to harden. The initial shock was slowly giving way to a steely resolve. I wasn't just a grieving widow. I was a woman who had been wronged, a mother whose trust had been shattered.
I needed to understand. I needed to know what she had done with the money, and I needed to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I found myself meticulously going through my own bank statements, checking for any unusual activity, though I knew with a sickening certainty that the money wouldn't have come near my accounts. I called Mr. Davies' office again, this time more assertively, requesting confirmation of the payout details. I didn't mention Sarah, not yet. I just needed irrefutable proof, a paper trail that would lead me directly to Sarah's secret. Mr. Davies, though helpful, was bound by privacy regulations and could only confirm that the payout had been issued to the designated beneficiary on record, who was indeed Mrs. Eleanor Sterling. But the funds had been released to the account specified by the executor of the estate. Executor. That was Sarah. She had appointed herself executor, of course, and then, it seemed, had rerouted the funds to herself. The phone call that finally shattered the silence, the one that truly exposed everything, came on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in the kitchen, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring blankly at the rain-streaked window. My phone rang. It was an unknown number from California. Usually I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick it up. "Hello?" I said, my voice raspy. A man's voice, professional and calm, responded. "May I speak with Eleanor Sterling?" "Speaking," I replied, my stomach tightening. "Mrs. Sterling, this is Mark Johnson from Premier Wealth Management in Los Angeles. I'm calling regarding the investment portfolio opened under the name Sarah Sterling. She recently requested a significant withdrawal, and as part of our protocol, we're required to notify the primary contact listed for any jointly managed or dependent accounts. As your daughter, you were listed as a secondary contact." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Sarah Sterling? Investment portfolio? Withdrawal?" I stammered, my mind racing. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling. The account was opened approximately 6 months ago, funded by a substantial deposit from an insurance payout. Sarah indicated it was her inheritance from her father. She recently liquidated a significant portion, approximately $400,000, to purchase a property in the Pacific Palisades." $400,000. Liquidated. A property. Pacific Palisades? The words tumbled out of the man's mouth, each one a hammer blow. 6 months ago. That was just after Dad died. She hadn't just taken the money, she'd invested it. And then she'd used it to buy herself a mansion in California, while I was here, struggling, grieving, wondering where my security had gone. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. This wasn't a mistake, this was a calculated, cold-hearted deception. The carefully constructed facade of the grieving daughter had crumbled, revealing a ruthless pragmatist. The initial humiliation of being excluded and lied to by my own child was now eclipsed by a burning, righteous fury. I finally understood. The complicated bureaucracy was her elaborate scheme to get her hands on Dad's legacy and use it for her own selfish gain, leaving me to fend for myself. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I looked around the familiar kitchen, the one Dad and I had renovated together, the one filled with memories. It suddenly felt less like home and more like a cage built with lies and betrayal.
The emotional numbness was gone, replaced by a sharp, clear vision. I knew with absolute certainty that this was far from over. The silence was broken. The game had changed. The man's voice, still calm and professional, was a stark contrast to the earthquake rumbling inside me. "Mrs. Sterling, are you there?" I swallowed, trying to find my voice. It came out, a thin, reedy thing. Yes, I'm here." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. "She purchased property? In Pacific Palisades?" I needed to hear it again, to confirm it wasn't some horrific hallucination brought on by grief and stress. "That's correct, Mrs. Sterling. A very nice property, I understand. Very exclusive area." Exclusive. Of course it was exclusive. Sarah had always had expensive tastes, the kind I'd always tried to temper with practicality, with budgets, with the need to save for the future. A future she had now stolen. And she used my husband's insurance money for this? The question felt absurdly polite, a whisper against the roaring inferno of my rage. She indicated it was her inheritance, Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Johnson repeated, his tone unwavering. She presented documents, of course. We followed standard procedure. It appeared to be a clear directive from the executor of the estate. Executor. The word landed like a punch. She had appointed herself executor. Dad, in his trust, had probably named her as a contingency, assuming she'd act with integrity. Integrity. The word felt like a foreign language in the context of Sarah's actions. I see, I managed, though I saw nothing except the devastating clarity of her betrayal. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. You've been very helpful. I hung up, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. The kitchen, once a sanctuary, now felt tainted. Every chipped tile, every worn countertop seemed to mock me. Dad's insurance money. $500,000, meant to be a cushion, a legacy, a promise of security. And Sarah, my firstborn, my supposed confidant, had rerouted it, invested it, and bought herself a mansion in California, all while I was here, navigating my grief alone, oblivious to the extent of her deceit. The humiliation of being lied to was a bitter pill, but this was a different order of magnitude. This was calculated, cold-blooded theft. I walked out of the kitchen, my legs feeling strangely heavy, as if I were wading through thick mud. I went into the living room, the room where Dad and I had watched countless movies, where we'd entertained friends and family, where he'd read his grandchildren bedtime stories. Now it was just empty. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the deafening presence of a lie. Sarah hadn't just lied to me, she had erased me from the equation of my own financial future. She had assumed I was too weak, too broken by grief to notice. And for a while she'd been right. I had been drowning. But the conversation with Mr. Johnson had pulled me to the surface, gasping for air, and the air I was now breathing was thick with the poison of her deception. I thought of Emily. My sweet, struggling Emily, always so worried about money, always so sensitive to the slightest hint of stress. Sarah had denied Emily her rightful share of her father's legacy too. Not just me. All of us. The initial wave of anger, hot and blinding, began to recede, replaced by something colder, sharper. It was the kind of calm that precedes a storm, a terrifying stillness that settled deep in my bones. I wasn't going to confront Sarah in a blind rage. That would be too easy, too predictable. That would be giving her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. No, this required strategy. This required precision. I spent the next few days in a state of hyper-awareness. Every interaction, every overheard conversation, every glance from Sarah felt loaded with a new, sinister meaning. She called me every other day, her voice brimming with false concern. "How are you holding up, Mom? Still feeling a bit down? I'm so sorry I can't be there more often, but things are just so hectic here, you know?" Hectic. Buying mansions, investing fortunes, while I was trying to figure out how to pay the next month's utility bills. I'd answer in short, clipped sentences, a stark contrast to my usual effusive responses. I saw her flinch slightly at my tone a couple of times, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but she quickly smoothed it over. She was good at that, good at smoothing things over. It was a skill she'd honed over years of managing my emotions, of playing the responsible daughter. But now, I saw through the act. I saw the calculating mind behind the pretty facade. I started digging. I needed proof, undeniable proof that I could use, not just to confront her, but to dismantle her carefully constructed world. I went back to Dad's study, to that fireproof box. I'd only skimmed its contents that first night, my mind reeling from the shock. Now, with a clear, cold head, I went through everything again. I found his will, of course, meticulously drafted years ago. He had appointed me as executor, with Sarah as a backup. But then,
Buried within a folder of old legal documents, I found a notarized amendment to the will signed about a year before he died. It wasn't a complete rewrite, but it addressed the handling of his insurance policy specifically. It stated that in the event of his death, the insurance payout was to be immediately transferred to a trust fund established for Eleanor Sturming, to be managed by her, with clear guidelines for its distribution for her ongoing care and security. He'd even included the trust account number, a different one than the one Mr. Johnson had mentioned. This amendment was dated. It was notarized. It was legal. And Sarah, as executor, would have been privy to this. She had deliberately ignored it, circumvented it, and used Dad's money for her own benefit. The sheer audacity of it, the calculated disregard for her father's explicit wishes, sent a fresh wave of fury through me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about Dad. It was about his legacy, his intentions, his last wishes being trampled underfoot by his own daughter. The next time Sarah called, her voice dripping with saccharine concern, I was ready. "Mom, are you sure you're okay? You sound distant." "I'm fine, Sarah," I said, my voice even, calm. "Just been doing some paperwork." "Oh," she said, a subtle shift in her tone, a hint of apprehension. "Anything important?" "Just going through Dad's things," I replied, letting my words hang in the air. You know, trying to tie up loose ends. I could almost feel her tensing on the other end of the line. "I'm handling everything, Mom," she said, her voice a little too firm. "You don't need to worry about any of that."
"That's what you keep saying," I countered, my voice still soft but laced with an edge she couldn't ignore. "But I found something interesting, Sarah. A little amendment to Dad's will, dated about a year before he passed. Apparently, he had very specific instructions for that insurance money, a trust set up for me." There was a beat of silence, a deafening, pregnant pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. "What are you talking about, Mom? I've never seen any amendment." Her denial was too quick, too defensive. It was the sound of a cornered animal. "Really?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Because it's quite clear. Dad's intention was for me to have control of that money, to manage it, for my security, not for it to be invested in California real estate by someone who claims it as her inheritance." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I could hear her breathing, ragged and shallow. She knew I knew. The carefully constructed edifice of her lies was crumbling around her. "Mom, that's not right," she stammered. "Dad wanted me to have a good future. He always said he wanted us all to be financially secure." "He wanted me to be financially secure, Sarah," I corrected, my voice hardening. "He trusted me. He knew I would use that money wisely, for my needs. He didn't know you'd use it to buy a mansion in Pacific Palisades while I was sitting here, wondering if I could afford to heat the house." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "And the trust fund, Sarah? The one he set up for me, with its own account number? You bypassed all of that, didn't you? You made yourself executor, and you rerouted everything. And then you sold off half of it to buy yourself a fancy vacation home." The words spilled out, fueled by months of suppressed rage and humiliation. Her voice, when it finally came, was a tight, brittle thing. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. Dad was gone. You were falling apart. Someone had to take charge. And that money, it was a lot. I saw an opportunity for all of us. I could invest it, make it grow, secure our futures. I was going to tell you. I was going to give you more than you ever dreamed of." Her justification was a twisted, self-serving narrative. "Make it grow? Secure our futures?" I scoffed, the sound devoid of humor. "You bought a mansion, Sarah. A mansion. While I was left here with nothing. And Emily? Did you think about Emily when you were signing papers for your Californian paradise?" The mention of Emily seemed to hit a nerve. "Emily will be fine," she snapped, a flicker of the old dismissiveness returning. "I'm helping her with her tuition. You don't need to worry about Emily." "You're helping her?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Are you paying her tuition with the money Dad left for my security? Or are you using the money you stole from both of us?" Her silence was my answer. It was the confirmation I needed, the final nail in the coffin of her integrity. I felt a strange sense of calm descend. The fight was no longer about discovery.
It was about reclamation, and the fight was about to begin in earnest. "You know, Sarah," I said, my voice suddenly imbued with a chilling certainty. "Dad's amendment specifically states that the trust fund was to be managed by me, and if the executor of the estate failed to uphold his wishes, there were consequences." I let that sink in. Consequences.
I think it's time you learned exactly what those consequences are. I wasn't just going to ask for my money back. I was going to make her pay. Not just financially, but in every way that mattered. The illusion of the grieving daughter was gone. In its place was a woman who had discovered a deep, unsettling well of ruthlessness within herself, a well she'd never known existed. It was fueled by betrayal, by the desecration of her husband's memory, and by the cold, hard fact that her own child had systematically robbed her. The air in the house felt different now, thicker, charged with unspoken threats. The silence was no longer an empty void. It was a promise of what was to come. I looked at my phone, the screen reflecting my face. A face etched with grief, yes, but now also with a steely, terrifying resolve. The game had irrevocably changed. The tremor in my hands had subsided, replaced by a steadiness that felt alien, yet deeply empowering. Sarah's silence on the phone, that choked breath, was the sound of her world cracking. She thought she had buried me, buried Dad's wishes, buried the truth under layers of expensive real estate and manufactured concern. She was wrong. I wasn't just the grieving widow. I was the quiet observer who had finally seen the monster hiding in plain sight. The humiliation of her deceit had been a raw, open wound, but the discovery of that amendment, the tangible proof of Dad's foresight, had cauterized it, leaving behind something harder, something unyielding. Consequences, Mom? Her voice, when it finally returned, was strained, laced with a desperate attempt at normalcy that didn't fool me for a second. What are you talking about? You can't just accuse me of things like this. Accuse? I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Sarah, I'm not accusing you. I'm stating facts. Dad's amendment is crystal clear. It designates me as the trustee for that insurance money, with specific instructions for my care and security. It's not up for interpretation. It's not up for your investment opportunities. And by the way, the trust account number is right there, so you couldn't possibly have accidentally used the wrong funds. I let that sink in, imagining her scrambling, her mind racing to find a loophole that didn't exist. You, my dear daughter, in your capacity as executor, failed to uphold Dad's most explicit wishes. You circumvented the trust, you declared the money yours, and you used it to purchase assets that belonged to me and to Emily. That's not a failure to uphold wishes, Sarah. That's outright theft, and it has legal ramifications, serious ones. I heard a muffled sound on her end, like she'd dropped something. Then a shaky, high-pitched laugh. Mom, you're being ridiculous. This is crazy. You're just upset. You're not thinking straight. Oh, I'm thinking straighter than I have in years, Sarah, I said, my voice dropping to a low, measured tone that I knew would unnerve her more than any shouting. I'm thinking about Dad's last wishes. I'm thinking about the fact that you lied to me, repeatedly. I'm thinking about how you've gambled away my security and my daughter's inheritance. And I'm thinking about how you're going to make this right. Make it right? She whispered, her bravado completely gone. Yes, make it right, I confirmed, the words sharp and clear. All of it. The property in Pacific Palisades, the investments, everything. And since you've been so keen on managing Dad's money, I'm going to need you to manage the process of liquidating those assets and transferring the funds with all accrued interest back to my trust account. And you'll be covering all the legal fees and any penalties associated with your mismanagement. You see, Dad was a very clever man. He anticipated this possibility. The amendment has a clause, Sarah, a rather specific one about the consequences for an executor who breaches their fiduciary duty. I could hear her hyperventilating. What? What clause? It states, I continued, enjoying the pure, unadulterated panic in her voice, that in such an event, the executor forfeits any and all rights to their own inheritance, as stipulated in the original will,
and must compensate the wronged party for any financial and emotional damages incurred. Essentially, Sarah, you're going to have to pay me back every single penny, and then some. And in return for your cooperation in rectifying the situation swiftly and without further legal entanglement, I might consider dropping any criminal charges I might pursue. A sob escaped her. Criminal charges? Mom, you can't be serious. You wouldn't do that to your own daughter. I wouldn't have to, Sarah, I replied, the cold truth hanging heavy between us. You would be doing it to yourself. And remember, you're not just dealing with me, you're dealing with Dad's legacy. His intentions. You made your choice when you decided to bypass his will and steal his insurance money. Now you have to live with the consequences. So, here's what's going to happen. You are going to get a lawyer, a good one. You are going to sign over all the deeds, all the investments, everything that was purchased with Dad's money. And you are going to wire the full amount, with interest, into the trust account for Eleanor Sterling, immediately. I have the account number right here. You have 72 hours. After that, my lawyer takes over. And believe me, Sarah, my lawyer is very, very good at making people regret their decisions. I hung up before she could respond. The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't the empty silence of grief anymore. It was the charged silence of a battlefield after the dust had settled. I walked over to the window, looking out at the familiar suburban landscape. It looked the same, but it felt entirely different. It was no longer a symbol of a life built on stability and love, but a testament to my own resilience, my own capacity for a strength I never knew I possessed. The next few days were a blur of controlled activity. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright, whom I'd found through a discreet recommendation. I laid out the facts, presented Dad's amendment and the bank statements Mr. Johnson had so helpfully provided. Miss Albright's eyes, initially sympathetic, turned to ice as she listened. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice clipped, "this is audacious. Your daughter has committed a significant felony, embezzlement, fraud, theft, and the amendment to the will is your golden ticket." I spent those 72 hours in a state of heightened anticipation. Sarah didn't call again. Her silence was more eloquent than any excuse she could have offered. I imagined her pacing, her face pale, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her.
I pictured her frantically trying to sell off assets, facing the bewildered questions of real estate agents and financial advisors who suddenly found themselves dealing with a desperate seller. On the third day, a notification appeared in my online banking app. A substantial sum had been deposited into the trust account, more than enough to cover the initial payout, with a significant surplus that Miss Albright assured me was a testament to Sarah's panic and hurried liquidation of assets. Accompanying the deposit was a curt email from a law firm I didn't recognize, confirming the transfer and stating that their client, Sarah Sterling, had agreed to transfer all associated properties and investments to Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, as per the terms of the amended will, to avoid further legal action. I reread the email, a slow, steady smile spreading across my face. It wasn't a smile of triumph, exactly. It was the smile of someone who had finally come home after a long, arduous journey. It was the smile of reclaimed peace. Later that afternoon, my younger daughter Emily called. Her voice was tentative, as it had been since her father's passing. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah called me. She was really upset. She said something about having to sell some things. I don't really understand. I took a deep breath. This was the harder part. Not the confrontation, not the legal maneuvering, but the mending of fractured family bonds. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my voice soft, filled with a warmth that had been missing for so long. "Come over, we'll talk. I'll explain everything, and then we can decide together what we do next." When Emily arrived, her eyes wide with apprehension, I sat her down at the kitchen table, the very same table where Mr. Johnson's call had shattered my world. I didn't shy away from the details. I told her about Dad's foresight, about Sarah's betrayal, and about the consequences. Emily cried. She was angry. She was bewildered. But as I spoke, as I showed her the deposit notification and explained how her father's love had provided for us, even in his absence, a fragile peace began to settle over her. "So, Sarah's not going to get any of Dad's money?" she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet astonishment. "No, sweetheart," I confirmed.
reaching across the table to take her hand. Dad's money is safe, and it's going to be used exactly as he intended, for our security, for our future, and for Emily's dreams. We can finally breathe. We sat there for a long time, the weight of years of unspoken grief and deception slowly lifting. The house felt lighter, the air was cleaner. The silence was no longer a void, but a space filled with the quiet promise of healing. Sarah's call had been the breaking point, the moment her lies were exposed. But this, sitting here with Emily, our hands clasped, the sunlight streaming through the window, felt like the true beginning. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was still pain, still the gaping wound of Sarah's betrayal, but there was also clarity. There was justice, and there was the profound, unshakable knowledge that I had honored my husband's memory, protected my daughters, and found a strength within myself that I never knew existed. The money was mine, yes, but the true prize was the restoration of my own dignity, the reclaiming of my own life, and the quiet, profound victory of knowing that love, even after death, could still provide.